Give me your leftovers, and I'll make you walk again. The words hung in the crisp morning air like an impossible dare, leaving Eleanor Lancaster staring in disbelief at the thin 12-year-old boy standing at her service entrance. Her steel gray eyes narrowed, a cruel smirk forming on her lips. Do you honestly expect me to believe some street magic from a slum rat? She scoffed, her voice slicing through the marble hallway like broken glass. Elijah Carter didn't flinch. He had rehearsed this moment for days, watching her from across the street as she tossed untouched plates of gourmet food into the trash while he and his grandmother went hungry. I wasn't joking, he said steadily, surprising himself with his calm. You spent millions on the finest doctors for 8 years, and yet here you are, still in that chair. I can help you, but I want the food you throw away. Eleanor's laughter rang out, echoing against the mansion's walls, dripping with mockery. Little boy, I've paid 15 million to the best neurosurgeons alive. What makes you think you see something they don't? Elijah's eyes locked on hers, unshaken. Because I notice what they ignore. You take 3 white pills and 1 blue one every afternoon at 2. And your legs, cold even in the summer. Her smirk faltered. How do you know that? She whispered. Elijah leaned forward, his voice barely above a murmur. Because I've been watching, and I know exactly what's wrong with you. Eleanor's hand tightened on her wheelchair armrest. Fear, real, unguarded fear, flashed in her eyes for the first time, but she masked it quickly, slamming the door in his face. Elijah walked away slowly, already knowing he had just planted a seed she would never be able to ignore. Would you trust a child if he said he could heal you? 3 days had passed since Eleanor Lancaster had slammed the door on Elijah Carter, yet his words haunted her like an echo she couldn't silence. No matter how many times she told herself the boy was just another desperate slum kid chasing an impossible dream, her mind kept replaying the unsettling accuracy of his observations, the exact time she took her medication, the peculiar chill in her legs that even her private neurologist had failed to explain. On the 4th morning, she decided she needed answers. A single phone call to her assistant brought a neatly compiled dossier to her desk within hours. Elijah Carter, age 12, straight-A student on a full scholarship at Eastbrook Academy, living with his grandmother, Lillian Carter, in the decaying Riverside Gardens housing complex. No father listed, mother killed in a car accident when he was 5. No criminal record. Typical, Eleanor muttered, skimming through the pages, though her tone betrayed the faintest tremor of unease. But one section made her pause. Lillian Carter, 73, former hospital nurse's aide, retired after severe diabetes had left her disabled, only to make an unexpected, clinically undocumented recovery in the past 2 years. Eleanor's lips curled in disbelief. What could an old woman from a public hospital possibly know that her team of specialists didn't? Yet across the street, Elijah was preparing for his second move, certain now that Eleanor's condition was not what it appeared to be. Grandma, he said that evening, settling beside Lillian on the porch, tell me again about pseudo-paralysis. Lillian's eyes glinted with the wisdom of 4 generations of healers, midwives, herbalists, women whose knowledge had been handed down since the Mississippi Delta days. Her legs tense when she doesn't think anyone's looking, Lillian said quietly. The muscles react to emotion, not damage. That's the mind's prison, not the body's. Elijah nodded, remembering how Eleanor's feet had twitched when she barked at her staff, how her calves tightened in anger. They were subtle signs, invisible to the untrained eye, but to him they were glaring proof. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat in her opulent parlor, thumbing through the report again, telling herself it was nonsense. That night, Dr. Stephen Marlowe, her neurologist, arrived with the results of recent tests. Eleanor, your nervous system is functioning perfectly, he said hesitantly. There's no physical reason for your paralysis. The words struck like a blade. Are you accusing me of faking this? She snapped. No, he said, but it may be psychosomatic. With the right therapy. Enough, she barked, cutting him off, her pride shielding her from the truth. Later, unable to sleep, she stood at her bedroom window, gazing across to the dim light in the Carter apartment. She could see silhouettes moving inside, a family living on an income smaller than what she spent on wine each month. And yet somewhere in that cramped space, she knew lay knowledge her millions could not buy. For the briefest moment, something strange welled up inside her, humility. But she crushed it quickly, replacing it with a cold resolve. "That boy will regret ever thinking he could humiliate me," she whispered. What she didn't realize was that Elijah had already identified her greatest weakness. She would never accept help freely given. She would rather suffer than owe anything to someone she considered beneath her. That was fine by him. His grandmother had taught him that to heal someone truly, you first had to make them face exactly how sick they really were. And in Eleanor Lancaster's case, that sickness ran far deeper than her legs. Eleanor Lancaster prided herself on winning battles before her opponent even knew a war had begun. And in her mind, Elijah Carter was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. The first move in her silent campaign came with a single phone call to Eastbrook Academy. "Principal Hargrove," she said in her smooth but icy tone, "this is Eleanor Lancaster, chair of the Lancaster Foundation. I'm calling about one of your scholarship students, Elijah Carter. His behavior has been inappropriate, trespassing, harassing residents. I'm sure you understand my concern." The next morning, Elijah was summoned to the principal's office and warned in no uncertain terms that his scholarship, his lifeline, would vanish if any such complaints arose again. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She then contacted the building superintendent at Riverside Gardens, hinting that certain tenants were creating a disturbance for respectable neighbors. The man couldn't legally evict the Carters, but within days Elijah and Lillian were enduring surprise inspections, fabricated noise complaints, and threats of fines for imagined violations. "She's trying to make us disappear," Elijah told his grandmother one evening as she prepared their nightly herbal tea. Lillian, unshaken, sipped from her cup and studied her grandson with the calm of someone who had faced worse storms. "Boy, when the rich are afraid of the poor, it's because they know they've done something wrong," she said. "And when they're afraid of the truth, they'll do anything to destroy anyone who can expose it." Elijah frowned. "But what if she gets my scholarship taken away? What if we get kicked out?" Lillian's eyes softened, but her voice was steady. "Then we adapt. Always remember, our family has never been powerless, even when the world tried to convince us otherwise." She leaned back and told him a story from decades earlier, about a white doctor who had tried to drive her out of the hospital because she knew treatments he didn't. "He used every bit of influence he had," she said, "until one day a wealthy patient came in with a condition I'd cured in dozens of poor folk. When his expensive methods failed, guess who they called? And when I saved that man's life, the doctor lost everything. Not because I sought revenge, but because the truth has a way of shining through the cracks." Elijah listened intently, realizing that his battle with Eleanor was not about medicine alone. It was about exposing the rot at the core of her power. Over the next week, he began digging. The school's library computers yielded more than he expected. Eleanor hadn't been born rich. She was the daughter of Polish immigrants, marrying into wealth when she wed Harold Lancaster III, heir to a fortune built in part on exploitative labor. The so-called accident that left her in a wheelchair happened the day after she discovered Harold planned to divorce her for a younger woman. Harold died just 2 years later, leaving her the entire fortune, thanks to a will altered a week before his sudden heart attack. Elijah also unearthed a deeper connection. His own family's history was entwined with hers. His great-grandfather had worked as a laborer on the Lancaster estate. His grandmother, Lillian, had once cared for Harold's mother during a terminal illness. The most shocking discovery was buried in Lillian's private medical records. Harold's mother had survived cancer thanks to treatments Lillian had administered, treatments the family doctors credited to failed conventional methods. Elijah closed the files with a slow breath, the pieces falling into place. "She's not just paralyzed in body," he told Lillian the next morning. "She's paralyzed by guilt, fear, and shame." His grandmother smiled faintly. "And now you see what kind of healing she really needs." From that moment, Elijah stopped seeing Eleanor Lancaster as an untouchable enemy and started seeing her as a patient, though one far more resistant than any he'd ever encountered. Every attempt she made to belittle him now served as confirmation of his diagnosis. Her body might be whole, but her mind was trapped in chains she had forged herself. Yet he knew that confronting her directly again would be pointless. Eleanor was the kind of woman who would rather burn her own house down than admit she needed help. That meant his approach had to be different, subtle, strategic, and unrelenting. Over the next several days, Elijah watched her from a distance, noting the small tells others ignored. When she was furious, her legs tensed. When startled, her feet shifted ever so slightly. They were reflexes she couldn't control, betrayals of her carefully maintained facade. Each clip was a small crack in the wall of lies she had built around herself. At the same time, Elijah dug deeper into her past. He spoke quietly with older residents in the neighborhood, piecing together whispers about Harold Lancaster's sudden death. Some recalled Eleanor's desperate attempts to secure control of the estate. Others mentioned a private doctor who had all but vanished after the funeral. These fragments of rumor aligned with what Elijah already suspected. Eleanor's paralysis was more than a personal deception. It was a shield that had protected her from scrutiny over her husband's death. One evening, Lillian found him hunched over a stack of handwritten notes. "You're playing with fire," she warned. "You think she's dangerous now? Wait until she realizes you can burn her whole world down." Elijah didn't look up. "I'm not trying to burn it down, Grandma. I'm trying to make her see what she's done, what she's become. If she walks again, it'll only matter if she can live with herself." Lillian regarded him with quiet pride. "Then you understand what it means to be a healer. It's not about curing a symptom. It's about treating the sickness at its root, even if the root is buried in poison." By the end of the week, Elijah had assembled a small but potent arsenal: recorded footage, historical documents, and a witness who could speak to the real events of Harold Lancaster's final days. All that remained was to decide how and when to confront her. He knew the moment had to be precise, impossible for her to deflect or spin. And as he watched the lights in her mansion flickers against the dark night sky, he realized that the most dangerous part wasn't proving that she could walk. It was showing her that the real paralysis had always been in her soul. The opportunity came sooner than Elijah expected. On a quiet Sunday morning, when the air was crisp and the streets were empty, he stood before the imposing front doors of Eleanor's mansion. Not the side entrance where deliveries and staff came and went, but the grand entryway reserved for her most important guests. At his side stood Lillian, calm and resolute, and a third figure who made Eleanor's blood run cold the instant she opened the door. Dr. Margaret Holloway, the neurologist who had once treated Harold Lancaster's mother and who knew far too many buried truths. "What is this?" Eleanor demanded, her voice brittle but laced with venom. "I've come to keep my promise," Elijah replied evenly. "Today is the day you stand up." Eleanor scoffed and reached to slam the door, but Elijah's calm persistence was like a wedge in her defenses. "Go ahead and call your security. They'll want to hear this too." Lillian stepped forward, opening an old leather briefcase that smelled faintly of dust and time. "Eleanor Kowalski," she began, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "Daughter of Polish immigrants, married Harold Lancaster in 2005, 3 months after discovering he planned to leave you. The so-called accident that put you in that chair happened exactly one day later." Eleanor's face blanched, her carefully painted facade cracking at the edges. Dr. Holloway unfolded a set of faded medical charts. "These are your neurological scans, Eleanor. They've always shown normal activity. You paid me handsomely to declare otherwise. $5 million to keep the truth buried." Elijah reached into his pocket and withdrew a small device. At the press of a button, Eleanor's own voice filled the marble hallway, recorded with pristine clarity. "If Harold finds out I can walk, I lose everything. Keep confirming the paralysis, and I'll double your fee." Eleanor's eyes darted wildly, searching for a way out. But there was none. "Not just that," Elijah continued. "We've recorded you standing, walking, even dancing when you thought no one was watching. 43 separate videos over 6 months. You fooled the world, but not us." The color drained from Eleanor's cheeks, and she gripped the armrest of her chair as though it were the only anchor in a collapsing storm. Lillian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "And then there's Harold's death. Poison, Eleanor. Digitalis, the same plant extract that's been used for centuries to simulate heart failure. almost impossible to trace after a few days. Dr. Holloway's expression was grim. You blackmailed me into declaring it a natural death. I was a coward, and I let you turn me into your accomplice. But no more. The weight of the evidence was suffocating, and for the first time in years, Eleanor's eyes filled with something other than contempt. Fear. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. I gave my life to that man. He was going to throw me away like garbage. Elijah's voice was steady, unyielding. And so you turn yourself into a victim for the world to pity while building your empire on lies. But the truth is, you can walk. You've always been able to. His next words came with a quiet authority that reached straight past her defenses. Stand up, Eleanor. She shook her head violently, muttering denials. But when Elijah suddenly barked the order again, sharp and commanding, her body reacted before her mind could stop it. In one swift, almost involuntary movement, she was on her feet, trembling, eyes darting between the three of them. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with the collapse of 8 years of deception. Congratulations, Elijah said softly. You're cured. Officially. But the cure was only the beginning. Eleanor's moment of standing seemed to freeze the air, but before she could retreat back into the safety of her chair, Lillian stepped forward and placed a thick stack of documents into her hands. These will be delivered today to the police, the FBI, and the IRS, she said evenly. Insurance fraud, falsification of medical records, tax evasion, and first-degree murder. Elijah's voice followed low but relentless. We've also sent everything to the Washington Post, CNN, and every major news outlet. By tomorrow morning, the story of the paralyzed millionaire who could walk and killed her husband will be everywhere. Eleanor's breathing became shallow, and for the first time in her life, she looked cornered with no exit. The hallway's high ceiling seemed to press down on her. The walls, lined with portraits of long-dead Lancasters, appeared to watch her fall from grace. Outside, the faint wail of police sirens began to grow louder, winding up the driveway like a countdown to her undoing. She turned her gaze on Elijah, hatred simmering in her eyes. But beneath it was a flicker of something she couldn't suppress. Respect, or perhaps the recognition that she had been completely outmatched. Why? She spat. Why go this far? Elijah's reply was steady, his dark eyes locked on hers. Because you tried to destroy us to protect your lie, and because you've spent years throwing away the kind of wisdom money can't buy, while people like us fought for every scrap of dignity. Lillian's voice joined his, calm but razor-sharp. The real paralysis has always been in your soul, Eleanor. You locked yourself in a prison of guilt and greed, and you let it define you. Now you'll have time to reflect on the cost of that. The sirens grew deafening as patrol cars screeched to a halt outside. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble as officers stormed into the foyer, their eyes widening at the scene. A once celebrated philanthropist standing on her own 2 feet, exposed for the fraud she had perpetuated for nearly a decade. Mrs. Lancaster, one officer said, his tone formal but tinged with disbelief. You're under arrest. Eleanor's body swayed as if the words had hit her like a physical blow. She glanced at her wheelchair, sitting useless and empty behind her, the symbol of her long con now nothing more than an empty shell. As officers read her rights, Elijah stepped back, allowing the scene to unfold. He felt no triumph in that moment, only a quiet sense of inevitability. This was never about revenge. It was about truth, and truth had a way of demanding its own stage. Eleanor's wrists were cuffed, her designer bracelets clinking to the floor as they were removed. The cold steel bit into her skin, and for a fleeting second, her gaze flickered to Elijah again. You're just a boy, she said softly, as if still trying to comprehend the scale of her defeat. And you were a grown woman with every advantage, Elijah replied without hesitation. Who should have known better? The officers led her away, her heels clicking against the marble, until the sound faded beyond the threshold. The grand doors closed behind them, with a deep, echoing finality. Silence settled over the mansion, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence that follows a storm, heavy with the knowledge that nothing will be the same again. Lillian placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, pride and gravity mingling in her touch. It's done, she said quietly. No, Elijah replied. his voice steady but his gaze thoughtful. It's just beginning. 6 months later, the transformation was as complete as it was unthinkable. The Lancaster estate, once a cold monument to wealth and arrogance, now pulsed with life as the Lillian Harper Community Center, its marble halls echoing not with the click of expensive heels, but with the laughter of children and the voices of neighbors planning brighter futures. The FBI had seized Eleanor's assets, funneling them into programs for education, healthcare, and housing in the very neighborhoods she once ignored. Elijah, now 14, had become the youngest student ever accepted into Harvard's pre-med program on a full scholarship, though he still spent every weekend at the center, learning from Lillian and helping to train a new generation of healers who blended ancestral knowledge with modern science. Across the country, universities studied his case as proof that genius could emerge from anywhere, shattering long-held prejudices about where intelligence should come from. Eleanor, stripped of her fortune and her facade, now occupied a cramped prison cell, her once pristine hands calloused from kitchen duty. Her legs, once perfectly healthy, had begun to weaken from genuine atrophy. The irony was lost on no one. Elijah visited her once, standing on the other side of the scratched plexiglass. She looked at him with eyes drained of arrogance. "Why did you come?" she asked. "To make sure you understand," Elijah said evenly. "I never wanted to destroy you. I just wanted you to stop destroying others." She shook her head slowly. "I thought I was untouchable." Elijah's gaze was steady. "That was your real disability." He left without looking back, the heavy prison door closing behind him like a final chapter. In the months that followed, Elijah's story inspired national conversations about justice, healing, and the danger of underestimating those who live outside the boundaries of privilege. News outlets called it the Healer's Reckoning, but in the Riverside Gardens neighborhood, it was simply known as the day the truth stood up and walked. The center's motto, carved into the stone arch over the main entrance, read, "Healing begins where prejudice ends." And every time Elijah walked through those doors, he was reminded that the greatest victories weren't about defeating enemies, but about restoring balance. Now the question is, if you were in Elijah's place, would you have offered Eleanor the chance to change, or would you have let her face the consequences without mercy? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove the most powerful cures often come from the most unexpected hands.